friends, welcome back to my channel. Have you ever thought about moving to a very small town? Maybe you live in a big city and you think, oh, it would be so nice to live in a small town where everybody knows you and it's just life is so easy. If that is you, I have a cautionary tale for you. It is called Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon. This is a little folk horror story. I absolutely love this book. And I finished reading it a couple of days ago, and I have been really wanting to talk about this, but I haven't had time. Today, it's a rainy day. It's my day off, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to talk about this book today. So I'm going to start off with a very brief synopsis, and I'll tell you who I think would enjoy the book. And then I'm going to go into spoiler territory. So if you have not read this book and you plan to read it, once I say spoilers, I mean spoilers because I'm going to talk about it. Okay, so this book follows a family, Ned, his wife Beth, and their daughter Kate, as they move from New York City into a very small village called Cornwall Coombe. They find the house that they really like, and they move there with the goal to raise their daughter. We follow the story through the character of Ned as he learns about the town, the traditions, the people, and really uncovers the secrets of this town. It's really an interesting book. And of course, you're going into it knowing that it's a horror book, right? So as you're reading through the beginning of it, you're picking up very interesting tidbits about the town and learning the secrets. And then it all comes together. It's a slow build in the beginning. So the whole first half of it, you're learning background information. If you find that boring, you may find the first half of the book to be boring. I absolutely loved it. I found it to be really interesting. I liked the tidbits. I liked learning the different things about the town. It really comes together at about the halfway point through the book. And I promise that first half is there for a reason. So it serves a purpose. I encourage you to stick through it, read it. You're really going to love it. It's going to come together, and it comes together quickly, and it becomes fast-paced at that point. So I recommend this book to anybody who loves a good folkish horror, sinister town. Yeah, I really recommend it for a good fall read. Definitely recommend it. Okay, it is time for spoilers. So here's your warning. Stop watching if you plan to read this book because spoilers. One of the first things I want to talk about is the warning signs. To me, there's some things at the beginning of the story that I think really should have warned this family off of this move from New York City to the town. The idea is they're moving here because they want a safe place to raise their daughter, right? The first things we learn about her is that she has asthma and she needs doctor's care quite frequently. Before they move to this town, we meet the neighbor who shows them the house and answers their questions. Their first questions, of course, are, tell me about the schools and the doctors. She responds with, there is a school of sorts, and everybody in this town stops going by about the 8th grade. Yeah, if you want to continue on and go to high school, you can drive over there to another place over there. But none of the locals go there. Maybe the paper boy, he goes to a school out of town, but nobody else, because education just isn't important to the town. You're moving here to raise your child, and you're like, okay, well, there's no school. That's all right. We'll just go ahead and move there. And then we learn that there's no doctor. But we've been talking about the concern for the daughter's health. And we learned that the widow Fortune is the person who is the closest to the doctor in the community. She is sort of like, the local kind of healer. You've heard of like mountain folk healers. This is kind of who she is. She's the person who would be the midwife, the doctor, the veterinarian. She's everything to this village. Yeah, they go with it, and they're like, yeah, well, sign me up. No school, no doctor, great. And then we also have when Ned goes to talk to the man that lives next door, right? So we've met the wife. She's the one answering these questions, and then Ned goes next door, and he's talking to the guy. He's blind, but we learn that he used to be a professor, And he's talking to him about how he's looking forward to adapting to the traditions of the town. And this man's talking to him about, yeah, we don't change. We stick very true to tradition, and tradition is more important than anything in this town. And everything is as it was 100 years ago. And Ned's like, great, sign me up. And he's like, well, remember, people don't think about how hard things were 100 years ago. It was a big struggle when you didn't have any conveniences, things like doctors and education and modern conveniences. And they still say, sign me up. We're ready for this. We love it. We're good to go. So those to me are some of the first things that stand out as a red flag. Of course, I'm looking for red flags because I know this is a horror story. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the things that I found really interesting. So when you go into a small town, I live in a small town in the South, and one thing that is everywhere here is churches. So, of course, you're expecting to see the church, and you do. In this book, you see that there's a church and everybody goes to church. But it's also interesting because you start seeing some of their belief systems described pretty early in the book. One of the first ones that stood out to me was when Ned is talking to the widow, and she says, okay, I'm going to read this little part. She pointed upward. See that blue sky now? That's God's sky. And up there in that vast blue is God. But see how far away he is? See how far the sky, and look here at the earth. See how close, how abiding and faithful it is. See this little valley of ours. See the bountiful harvest we're to have. God's fine, but it's old Mother Earth that's the friend to man. So that's one of the first things that you learn about the town. You start recognizing, the value of the land. And so we see a little hint into Mother Earth there. One of the other things that we see early on is the belief in omens. And the widow Fortune is talking about slaughtering a pig. And when she opened up the pig, she found it had 2 stomachs. And she considers that to be an augur. So I think that's interesting too. So you have all these like little things come in. And as we meet the townspeople, they mention things to them also that seem like omens or portents of things to happen. So it's fun to read. Like I said, I enjoyed the beginning of this book because you get these little elements of, we've moved on. We're no longer a pagan community, but are we? Are we kind of pagan community? They're talking about the corn god and the corn maiden and how they're looking forward to Harvest Home. So Harvest Home is like the festival that happens. And every 7 years, they elect a new corn god, corn lord, and corn maiden. And we're learning right away the importance of that. And it's interesting. We meet character Worthy. Another thing that stood out to me was definitely some of the characters. And we're going back to education. When we meet Worthy, he wants to go to school. He still wants to be a farmer, but he wants to go to school. And he talks about having a tractor, and this is sort of forbidden to have a tractor, and it's forbidden to go to school. So, of course, when Worthy is chosen to be the corn lord, in my mind, I felt like that was sort of intentional because it's a way to prevent him from leaving the town and going to school, because nobody really has connection to the outside world except another character named Jack. And he travels by horse and buggy, and he goes and he trades his goods. He's sort of a peddler. He's the only character in the book that really has a lot of connections to the outside world, at least anybody from the village, because of course we have Ned and Beth who came from New York, and they're still dealing with New York City galleries, but they're really not sharing a lot of information about the town. Of course, they don't know a lot of information about the town, so they don't have anything to share, but we get the impression that Jack Stump really does know things. But for me, I kind of thought right away that Worthy was going to be chosen as the corn lord. And of course he was. And then he tries to run away because he doesn't want to be the corn lord. And I knew that Ned was going to get in trouble for talking to him and saying things like, it's your life. You got to make your own choices in life. when they brought him back and put him into the jail, I knew that I kind of suspected something would happen to Worthy then. I was very surprised by how Jack's timeline turned. And that, I think, to me was where I really realized what a shift this book had, because I did not expect some of the things that happened. I was actually surprised. I knew something was going to happen to Jack. But when Ned found him with his tongue cut out, I fell for the whole thing. I thought it was going to be the Soaksies, because it was talking about them, and they had left these warning notes for him about going and snooping into the woods that they owned. And then Ned had been snooping into the woods and he had gotten chased out by them. So I was really surprised when we learned that it was not the Soaksies, when we learned that it was the women of the town. I was really surprised. I expected it to be the widow. I didn't really expect it to be Tamara, but of course the widow was behind it. And then some of the other things that surprised me, I kind of had a feeling early on that there was something about the professor and his blindness, but when we find Jack with his tongue cut out, that's the moment I realized that the eyes were something to do with the town. And then when he took off his glasses and Ned saw that he didn't have eyes, that of course was, oh, okay, we are losing our eyes and we are losing our tongue and all of that. So that was like the big point to me, where I realized just how much control the widow had. And then when we start getting into it and we have the elements like Worthy and the cornhusk doll, and they're talking about worshiping Mother Earth, that's when I realized that it wasn't a Christian community, but it was a pagan community. And of course, I knew it was going to be a pagan community before, because we're talking about the corn. We've got the cornhusk doll, and Worthy freaks out when he sees it and goes and buries it in the yard and is like, don't tell anybody about it. Of course, I realized that they're practicing some sort of folk magic here in this town. And I guess that's early on when the widow talks about, when they talk about how she talks to the corn, and some of the little elements that come up, like she's charming the wart off of Ned, because that is folk magic. I actually know somebody who talks about that, how I think it was his grandmother or his aunt who had done that with a wart that he had, and described the whole folk magic of it, charming the wart away. And these things are just interesting to me. I love hearing about folk magic, and I loved the elements of folk magic in this book. And then when we learn just kind of how it's really goddess worship, and you realize it's the women, and I don't know, to me, I really liked that whole aspect of it, and it became really, really creepy and really, is it the widow that's holding this all together? Is she the glue? Because it seems like she's the one that everybody in the town looks to. So what happens when she dies? Will somebody else take her place? I know they mentioned maybe Missy Penrose would take place, or maybe Kate, because she's being raised there. But do you think so? Or do you think that the outside world will start being more influential in the town? And then some of the other questions I had when I was reading this is like, what did the neighbor do, the professor do, that got his eyes cut out, but not his tongue? And then I think they cut Ned's eyes and tongue out, right? So, like, he just sort of seems complacent and stays there even afterwards. I don't know. I kind of wonder, like, in the movie version, I know they made that whole point where the neighbor said, do you want to end up like me? It wasn't that explicit in the book, but I kind of wonder, like, do you think that the neighbor was trying to warn him in the beginning not to come, or do you think that he got taken over by the town? I find it all very interesting. If you hear groaning in the background, that's my dog. I've got him out on the porch because he keeps interrupting me when I'm trying to record this, and I put him out on the porch, but he wants to come in because it's raining outside. So I'm going to go let him back in soon. But I just wanted to share my thoughts, and I want to hear what you guys thought. Like, at what point did you realize where the story was going? And were you surprised that it was the Widow Fortune? I feel like I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was, because I just kind of got lost in the book. But I did see all these warning flags in the beginning, but I still found it interesting and fun, and I enjoyed this book, and I want to read more like it. So if you have any book recommendations for me, share them below. Anyway, these are my thoughts on Harvest Home, and thank you for watching today.